Welcome to today's webinar, Pandemic Response, Addressing the Needs of Homeless Students. My name is David Nash. I'm the Legal One Director, and as many of you know, we have been working very hard to try to give you the very latest information to help everyone in the field as we struggle with this global pandemic, and to provide you all the supports that we can. And as we have thought about areas where we want to make sure we're supporting you, we've thought about our vulnerable student populations. And it is so critical that we make sure we're doing everything we can to support all of our students. And obviously, there's so many challenges that come every day with being a homeless student, and those challenges are just exponentially greater now with some of the issues that we're all working through. So we have a wonderful team today for this presentation. I will say as we're getting started that we also do have the PowerPoint right in the presentation today. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can actually see and download the PowerPoint that we will be walking through. I also want to let everyone know that we will be sending each of you within 24 hours a link to today's recording. We'll be sending you the YouTube recording, the PowerPoint again, even though you could download it now, and a certificate so that you can show folks that you have gone through and successfully completed this webinar. So let's jump ahead to our next slide. As I said, we've been trying to provide as much support as we can for everyone in the field. We know how challenging it is to deal with all of these issues. So you have on this one slide links to so many of the prior presentations that we've done addressing this pandemic. So we give you here links to the recordings from sessions that we did starting on March 18th, the day that schools were closed statewide, all the way up through a webinar that we did yesterday on next steps now that schools are closed for the remainder of the school year. So I would urge you to take advantage of this. It's completely free. We want you to have this information and share it with others. And it's our way of just providing support to you as all of you are out on the front lines trying to support our students. Next slide. We also do include here a link. So this is yet another way that you can have access to today's PowerPoint. So this is a Dropbox link. If you do want to access the PowerPoint through this link, you would need to do so within the next 30 days. And again, you do have access to this PowerPoint right now, and you'll have it sent to you tomorrow. As many of you know, if you've gone through a prior Legal One training, we do our best to give you the latest legal information, to give you the resources you need to effectively serve students and fulfill your important roles. But of course, we're not providing legal advice. So as we go through our webinar today, we do want to encourage you, please type in questions as we go. We have a large number of people who are on the webinar today, so we may not be able to get to all of the questions. We will try to address as many as we can, and your questions will be captured, and they are very helpful for us as we develop frequently asked question documents and post more information on our website. So we do encourage you as we go, if you have questions, please type them in and we'll address as many as possible. We have an incredible team today, and I really want to credit Sandra Jakes. Sandra has done a wonderful job putting this presentation together. She is our supervisor of legal research and content development, and she has really taken the reins in thinking through what information do we need on addressing homeless students, and identified some of the great leaders in the state to help us understand how we can support all of our students. So we're thrilled that we have Sandra here kind of organizing today's presentation, along with Diane DiRuggiero, Chris Snyder, and Rebecca Gold, who we have with us for almost all of our webinars. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sandra, and thank you all so much for being part of today's presentation.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. And again, thank you to Diane and Chris and Rebecca for joining us as well. Next slide, please. We're going to be covering a number of topics. First is, where do you start? If hopefully your homeless liaisons are involved with this process as well, and those of you that are administrators that are listening have communicated with your homeless liaisons about what's being done or what you need to do or how to get resources and such, and we're going to be addressing that more as we go through the webinar today. So we'll talk about some best practices to get this started and to get into the webinar, and then we'll start talking about food issues, what we've observed and what Chris and Diane have seen so far, and questions that we have coming, and some possible resources to try to help your students where you can. We'll talk about eviction and housing issues. This pertains to the students that were homeless prior to the pandemic, but given that there are problems with people losing their jobs and various other things, there may be students added to that roster, unfortunately. So we'll talk about those issues. We'll also talk about instructional issues, and a question I know I get asked a lot whenever I've talked to anyone in the last month or so is about internet accessibility. And we will actually give you a bunch of resources for a lot of the companies on how to get free or reduced cost internet and ways to work with that. Talking about providing the materials if they don't have internet access, if they're going to get packets or something along those lines, and attendance issues as well. Attendance may be a big part of how you identify that the child is in trouble and that you need to reach out to them and try to help them. We will talk about mental health issues, and we'll give you a ton of resources of places to go and turnkey and try to get additional information. And then we'll talk about funding issues. How are you going to pay for all this stuff that you have to do? What does the government put out there or in the process of putting out there, or what do we need to still watch for in dealing with these types of things? So let's dive into this, starting with best practices. Chris, do you want to take the lead on this one?
Sure, Sandra. First, let me thank everyone for attending today, as well as David and Sandra and the team at NJPSA for allowing us to take part in this great opportunity to share some of the information that we are seeing on the ground and some of the other things that maybe we can help guide you along with. And obviously, you know, my position is as a regional program administrator, which means simply that I cover a series of counties here in South Jersey, Salem, Cumberland, Cape May, and most of the DHLs who are our district homeless liaisons. If they are attending, they know who I am. And I also, for this year and this year only, have been covering Mercer and Burlington County. And basically my role is to serve all the school districts in assisting and navigating some of the tricky things that you may see that come with identifying students who are McKinney-Vento eligible. For those of you who may not be a district homeless liaison, if you're not familiar with McKinney-Vento, McKinney-Vento is a law that was passed in 1987 in relation to students who are homeless and making sure that we level the playing field for those students as compared to students who may not be considered homeless. And just so that you know, the definition of homelessness for students in school really exceed the bounds of the housing and urban development definition, which is students who are doubled up, living in hotels, motels, campgrounds, and other places throughout their areas would be considered homeless and are entitled to certain aspects that will level the playing field from removing barriers to their education. So I just wanted to kind of start off with that, just so that you understand the difference of a McKinney-Vento student and a regular ed student. So some of the things that we are seeing on the ground has a lot to do with non-communication. And that really is the foremost problem that we have really with McKinney-Vento students, even during the school year when we were in face-to-face situations. As you know, these students are full of stress and anxiety related to their living situation, and added to it, their parents, guardians are feeling much of those same feelings, not understanding you know, where their next meal is going to come from, or maybe their next paycheck, or how they're going to survive or not get thrown out of their apartment. So you see a lot of that stress. So contacting the school or being up on schoolwork is not honestly their highest priority. So what I have found in working with these students over the past few years is that in order to make those contacts, you really need a network of people. And obviously in each school district, we have guidance counselors, we have school psychologists, we have mentors, teachers, administrators, and it takes a whole team of people to know what students they're in contact with and which ones they are not. And right now, especially during this COVID closure, contact with students, McKinney-Vento or otherwise, your districts should definitely know who they are from getting that contact information from guidance and from teachers. Who is not reporting in, who is not turning in their work, have they been able to make contact? And if you have not been able to make contact, I always tell a couple of tales. Number one is if you know the student's personal cell phone device number, that's the first one to call or text. If you can find them on Instagram or you can find them on any of the social media, that's a great way to get a hold of them as well. We do have school-related sites specifically just so that we can access those sites, look up the students' names. Generally speaking, they keep their own names, and you can find them on there. That's one way. Second way is maybe talk to the school nurse. The school nurse has a variety of other emergency contacts, usually listed on some type of card that is not necessarily provided in your school or student information system like PowerSchool. So that's a great way to do that. And if you find that both of those ways fail, I have found by networking with your local police departments, even the state police, perhaps you have an SRO or some type of security service. You may have a security service that's under contract for your district who work within your buildings. Utilize them. They're already receiving a check, and if they're not, that's a great way to keep them paid during the COVID response, is having them do some wellness checks, obviously following the COVID guidelines, but knocking on a door, seeing who answers, just so that you know that someone is receiving information. And you should always send them, if you're a district homeless liaison, send them with your business card. A lot of times, parents, like I said, just don't realize all of the work that school districts are doing to try to get a hold of people. So they might, and if you can, get a magnetic backing on it so they can put it on a fridge. Just a tip for you. Some other things, just wanted to make sure that a lot of the county resource agencies have been in touch with me and me reaching out to them. They are overwhelmed with service requests. So the more helpful you can be with them with specific answers, or if you're able to, again, try to network things like clothing and food services. That's one of the things we've done here in our local district is, guidance may be living close, or a teacher is living close to some resource agency and they can pick up a bag of clothes or pick up food. Those are a couple of ways in which you can help when you knock on that door. If you're showing up with something, they're more than welcome to answer that door, or more likely to answer that door. Some other available resources is the Homeless Network hotline, which is 211. And there's some links to some mental health services as well. Perform Care New Jersey is definitely one that we have been using. They will more than likely ask you if you had somebody working with those children, those McKinney-Vento students. And if you had, it's a 2-page form. It can look overwhelming, but if you just print it out and fill it out, they will get in touch right away with the family. You can go on to the next slide.
Okay, Diane, I think, why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll let you take the lead.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Diane DiRuggiero. I'm the regional coordinator for Bergen, Passaic, Hunterdon, Somerset, Sussex, and Warren counties in New Jersey. My colleague Chris did a great intro, so you are now well versed on what McKinney-Vento is. So we're going to go over some challenges, some strategies, and most of the information that we are all sharing is coming from real life events that have either, we've experienced in the past working with liaisons, or are occurring, at the present time due to COVID. At this time, as we all know, McKinney-Vento students, some of them may or may not be staying outside of their immediate school district. Perhaps they have moved to other families' houses there's a multitude of reasons. Some are being evicted, even though the eviction stop order is in place. And we'll get into that a bit later, but some have had to move. I've heard about some fires recently in one of my counties, so families, again, had to move and double up or move into motels. And the most important thing is, if you cannot reach out to them directly, you would immediately, or at least try to contact the liaison in that county. For example, we had a family of 4 that was displaced out of Warren County and moved to Hunterdon County, and this was right after the schools closed. So the 2 superintendents from Warren and Hunterdon worked together with the local liaisons to have the 4 students enrolled in the new school district, set up transportation to receive food and school packets. So again, everything right now has to do with communication, collaboration, and it was a great outcome. But that's because everybody worked together. And maintaining contact with McKinney-Vento students, especially your unaccompanied youth, especially for those who have those students that are couch surfing, that are 18 and over. With the funding, you can now offer prepaid calling cards so that they can keep in touch with the teachers or the nurses, or especially the liaisons. So again, the prepaid calling cards are more focused on the unaccompanied youth rather than the families, but if need be, that can be offered to families as well. One thing I find is that liaisons are also working with churches, synagogues, houses of worship, because the families are still checking in, and sometimes without giving away too much information, because we have to be, very cognizant of confidentiality. In working with the pastors and whatnot, the rabbis and whoever they're working with, explain what McKinney is, explain that maybe we want to put up some posters so that the families know who to contact. So that is also a way that you can, reach out to the families indirectly. Also, identifying families and youth who become homeless after schools closed. I gave that example of the coordination between the liaisons and the superintendents. But again, the coordinated outreach is really important to the motels. We have students sometimes on campgrounds, so you may want to reach out to whoever is running the campground. Again, it's more of making them aware that resources are still available, that maybe school is not particularly in session, but that the staff is still accessible. Because I think the thought is right now, schools are closed. That means nobody's working. Nobody's in the schools. Nobody's going to pick up the phone. So that's someplace that they don't even, attempt to reach out to. And you see the resource for Schoolhouse Connection. What that is, it's a group that works to overcome homelessness through education. They offer all types of services, advocacy. They have a website. You'll see them throughout the PowerPoint, and they really do connect the liaisons and the states with the federal government. They have webinars, so that is definitely a place that I would definitely check out. I would recommend checking out, is going to their website and taking a look to see what they offer. Okay, next slide, please.
Okay, so we'll move on to talking about food issues. Next slide. Either Chris or Diane, whoever.
Yeah, I could
start.
jump in here, Diane, and then you could just, add in where you want to. One of the first things that the governor did put into place along with the commissioner was taking a look at that breakfast and lunch, because that is a crucial aspect of schooling, that breakfast and lunch program. So at first the meals were offered and people had to come and pick up, but it was great because an executive order came out that required busing to deliver those meals if families requested that. So that has been very positive for our students who are McKinney-Vento. So if you're not doing that in your district, I highly suggest you do that. And DHLs, again, that's your district homeless liaisons, should definitely be reaching out to those families. If they are not on that meals list, they are automatically required to receive free lunch, breakfast, and if you do provide evening meals as well, for those students, that's an automatic. if they are McKinney-Vento eligible. So they should be receiving those meals. And if they're not receiving those meals, you want to make sure that you at least reach out to the family. Some may say they're okay and they don't need them. But in my experience, most families really need those supplemental meals to make it through each day. So we talked about a little bit about the busing there again, and Title I funding may be used to assist those families with the meal, especially during this COVID crisis. There is a lot of leeway that the federal government is offering states to use those Title I funds to meet the criteria during this crisis. So some of the red tape has been cut. And, you know, we do sponsor grants through our regions, and there may be funds that are available should you exhaust your Title I funding, especially for those evening meals, because a lot of school districts don't cover those as well. So if that is something that you're interested in my specific region, certainly I'm open to an email. Just give me a call, or you know, shoot me an email. My contact information will be listed at the end, but you definitely should be reaching out to me to find out. And again, you can always get on NJ Helps. There is information that is on there for related food banks, where families can go to receive health care, and also additional funding to keep them in their homes during this crisis. And the last piece I would make about there is there are county resource guides for any school administrator or liaisons to look at right online. I have them off of my website, www.woodstown.org, but you can go and just type in Cumberland County Resource Guide, and it'll automatically come up. You can click on it and you'll find a PDF form that will list all of the different resources in your county and those resource agencies to help folks who may not just be McKinney-Vento, but who also may be at risk or in need of those services. Diane, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I just want to mention with njhelps.org, the site helps the families and also unaccompanied youth 18 and older to see if they're eligible for food assistance, cash assistance, and health insurance. From that site, you can apply for services. So that is something you also want to share, not only with families, but also unaccompanied youth, again, 18 and over.
Okay, next slide.
Next slide.
Chris, you want to start?
Sure. So, you know, during spring break, not all districts did offer curbside pickup. Some were able to do so, but again, we're running into the same things that we do. You know, there are gaps. And again, that goes back to slide 1 when we talked about making those connections with those families. That's why it's so critical for teamwork on this, that DHLs, again, district homeless liaisons, should be speaking to the critical people in their district, especially administrators in their schools, to find out who has not reached out and find out what is going on and how they can help. That doesn't necessarily mean that it could limit itself to those McKinney-Vento eligible students, because you may be aware of some of those families who are at risk of losing their housing. So it's very good to try to address some of those gaps. Some of the summer issues that we may run into is that we right now do not have guidance from the state on how to address those. So I know that Diane is much more savvy when it comes to knowing where to go during the summer months to pick up some of those resources. So Diane, did you want to address some of that?
I believe that may be coming up in the next slide. So if you're, yes, there we go.
Okay.
All right, so summer food services and the local YMCA. With the summer food services, that link will take you to the summer food service program. It's federally funded, state administered, and it reimburses program operators who serve free, healthy meals and snacks to children and teens in low-income areas. So what you would do, you would go online, you'd pop in your zip code. It's a mapping tool that they offer, and you can find out where your summer site is. And there's also a text that you can text to summer meals. It's all in the website. You know, if you follow the link, you can also operate a site. So depending on if any shelters are listening in, any folks that run a shelter, you can also find out information about operating the site. And with the local YMCA, I know at the moment they are delivering meals. I don't think they're providing, I think they are delivering. And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, to folks that the districts are finding challenges in reaching, like students that are living outside of the district of origin in a motel or again on a campsite. So from what I understand, they are still collaborating with the school districts, and you can go onto that website or reach me at diader@bergen.org, because I've been working with the state coordinator for the Y on having meals sent out. So that is another option.
Yeah, and if I could just add in there,
Sure.
the YMCA, and just a quick search on Google, you can see the YMCA is prevalent from about central New Jersey northward. There is one YMCA in my region out of the 3 counties here in Salem, Cumberland, and Cape May. There's only one located in Vineland, New Jersey on Landis Avenue. So, that doesn't help, honestly, for those other counties. But, Vineland is an area with a lot of lower income folks. So, if you find yourself around that area and you're, a school administrator, you can always call the YMCA and see what kind of arrangements they can make if you're finding you have some students that cross those district lines and may not be there. Also, too, I want to make sure that I tell the liaisons that are out there, it's very common for movement right now. And I know that some of the COVID responsibilities should be stay put, but we have a lot of movement because we have people who are fearing hotspot areas, and they may move to an area that has lower numbers. And because they do that, they come into an area and they're looking for services. So we have found that has happened quite a few times. And the children intend, one of the key components of McKinney-Vento, just so that you know, is that the students have basically a stay put rule if they wish to continue in the district that they've been attending. So for instance, if they're attending District A and they move to District B that's maybe 20 to 25 miles away, they still are entitled to attend District A. In this time of virtual learning, the important piece is that District B be notified of this information so that District B can help support them and provide some of these services, especially for food resources. We have found that's been one of the key components that folks really don't understand and know, and they're going without those meals that the school can provide during the day when the local district, which is, I'm using as an example, District B, if that liaison knows, they can make the arrangements, even if the students are attending District A, to get those food resources that they have to deliver those food sources to them directly. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there for all the liaisons. If you're making contact with folks and they say, oh, we moved to such and such, try to make sure that you reach out to the liaison of that district. And you can find that liaison information either by reaching out to people like Diane or us, or you could go onto the NJDOE McKinney-Vento site and you could just type in the county and it'll list all the district homeless liaisons there for your information. Diane, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, next slide, please.
Okay, so we'll move into talking about eviction and housing issues. Next slide. Diane, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. So again, observed eviction issues. What I'm getting back from the liaisons throughout the counties is, again, that families are still being pressured to move. I find that it's primarily with families that do not have a lease, but they're just paying month to month. And without documentation showing that they do, in fact, have a lease, they do fall under McKinney-Vento. The reason being is exactly the reason why, or rather exactly why what's happening now, that they're being asked to leave because there is no lease, there's no, it's more of a handshake agreement. There was never any discussion of long term. It was more or less, I'll just stay here month to month. And because the landlords don't don't really feel like there's going to be consequences because, well, you never had a lease, so if I ask you to leave, it's okay. They know that these folks are not aware of what the laws are. I mean, some are, but then I get pushback and they'll say, well, they told me that that was only for New York City. So again, the liaisons do have resources that they can offer the families or work with the families to connect them to the resources. That, I'd say, is really the one thing that the liaisons can do. I've been asked by principals, can I call the landlord? And I always recommend not to do that because that may exacerbate the landlord putting the people out, but to just go through the proper motions of contacting, you know, the local agencies either for that county. And see, the other thing is sometimes they'll say, well, it is an illegal apartment. There's no fire escape. There's no back door. It's a basement. And I understand that. But in this situation where we're at right now with COVID, as far as I know, regardless of what the apartment looks like, the families cannot be put out. What would most likely happen is DCP and P would get involved, especially if there's children, you know, if there's children that are under the age of 18, and help to find them shelter if it is an illegal apartment and it's unsafe to remain there. But again, nobody can be put out.
I've actually given you, Diane, I've actually given you the link to the order, Executive Order number 106 from Governor Murphy that says what Diane is saying in New Jersey, that there's a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. So the link to the actual memo is there as well as a pushback if you want. If you yourself here, you know, that only applies in New York, that doesn't apply in New Jersey.
Because the issue that I'm finding is, and I mean, it makes sense as well, the shelters are not taking new people in different areas because they're also concerned they might bring someone in, you know, that has COVID, and that would be an issue, you know, and for everybody that's already staying at the shelter. So it has been challenging trying to find shelter beds for families or individuals, but I do know working, for example, with Passaic's, what is it, the COCs, it's Catholic Charities, they have been able to pay for motel stays. But again, I'm not sure how much money is available. I'm not sure how long that would be. But again, liaisons that are in my counties, if you're having issues, call me and we'll work through it. You know, and again, also problems attaining legal representation. There are advocacy groups, but again, right now, as you can imagine, you know, there's a long list, there's a long, you know, line to wait to speak to someone. So that's why if you're having an issue now with a family that's about to be put out, call me and I'll work as quickly as I can with you to try to prevent that. And if we have to, you know, we can also work with local authorities.
I've also given you there as a resource, and it's not even just for eviction, but it would be for any legal issues that may come up pertaining to any of these things. That is a link to the New Jersey State Bar Association that identifies the bar association in every county in the state of New Jersey. And they give you the contact email and phone number and person to call in and say, I need a lawyer to deal with eviction issues. And then they will give you a list of lawyers that deal with those types of things. So it's another resource to try to help find legal representation if that's something that's needed.
Thank you, Sandra. That'll be very useful, I'm sure. Even to me. Thank you very much.
Okay, next slide.
Okay. Okay, so HUD Resources, as I mentioned, there are resources that are online. And again, the families can file a complaint. I believe, Sandra, you put up the Dear Lending letter.
Yes.
So there is information on this page that you can just click on, and essentially it is information that you can share with families if they are experiencing a situation where they're being asked to move. And the law at the moment is saying that, you know, everybody's sheltering in place.
Next slide.
Yeah, can I just chime in just a little bit there? If you could just go back just for 1 second. I just wanted to add in there some of the things that we're seeing. And this is Chris again, by the way. You know, down here in Southern New Jersey, some of the things that we're seeing with landlords and, you know, aspects related to renters, you know, comes in the fact that they know that they cannot, evict someone during this time. However, many of the landlords and the issues that I'm dealing with McKinney-Vento families is that if there's anything wrong at the place where they're staying, the landlord is making, you know, very little effort in order to repair those things. So that's why this HUD resource is really important. I've used it several times to put on some pressure to these landlords. So for instance, a refrigerator dies, or stove is not working, or, you know, heat is not coming on. Those are things that are required in the lease for the landlord to resolve. And we're finding that a lot of them are not resolving it because they're not receiving income for it. So those are things that definitely HUD can help you with. It does take a bit of time to get that done. But, you know, I'm finding in a 3 to 5 day window, I have been getting responses, and those responses have been pretty successful. So I just wanted to add that to there. Next slide. Yep.
Diane, do you want to go? Or Chris?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Go ahead.
So in just looking at this, you know, there's the frequently asked questions for homeless youth is really important to take a look at, because you can find a lot of information that has to do with our, you know, runaway and homeless youth, what we would call mostly our unaccompanied youth. It seems to be one of the most tricky areas for our homeless liaisons to resolve, because sometimes and I've mentioned this in my trainings, sometimes the liaisons are not necessarily in positions to push back on eligibility requirements. And a lot of times, you know, administrators may consider someone who's living with someone else, an aunt, an uncle, a friend, a relative, that they're doing it just purposefully to live in that particular area or district. But many times, you know, we don't understand or know the reasons why someone would run away or why that youth became unaccompanied. Oftentimes, those students have trauma and they don't want to share that information right away. But part of the McKinney-Vento requirements are to get those students in school immediately. There is no designation for timeframes or, you know, resolving those things. You can always appeal those things, but the student must be admitted into school while that happens. So that's an important thing. And so it's one of the things that we talk about especially is making sure that the student has a roof over their head. So when we're talking about things like lengths of stay and shelter capacity, you know, again, we have limited resources down here in the southern part of the state. We have basically one main shelter, which is the Cumberland County shelter, family shelter in Vineland again. That's one of the main shelter areas. Fortunately, they don't have any students there right now, which is great. And then we have the women's shelter of Salem County, and there are particular rules that are surrounding some of those shelters. And that particular shelter, teenage children cannot come accompany, you know, their family members, and they are for domestic abuse. So it's usually for mothers, and many mothers will choose not to go into those shelters simply because they have to break their family apart. So just keeping those things in mind when it comes to working with runaways and unaccompanied youth is really important for our liaisons and our districts to consider before they think that a student is not entitled to that education in that district. Diane, you want to add anything?
This also covers students that are coming from out of state, out of country. We have a shelter in Teterboro in Bergen County where students can actually just walk up to the shelter, knock on the door, and they're admitted in. So they don't need a parent or guardian with them to bring them to the shelter. It's a safe space for them. And the National Network for Youth, the virtual office hours, at first I thought by reading that, oh, it's for unaccompanied youth to call in, but it's actually on various topics. You can call in, you can join in the conversation, and they give you an array of materials to choose from on previously recorded, you know, events and webinars. So it depends on what numbers you may have. And I find even for some counties, they don't realize the students are couch surfing and don't realize that they are would be considered unaccompanied youth. They are sleeping on friends' couches, and to them it's almost the norm because they're just not aware there are services out there. So this is a good place to start if you're really not familiar with what an unaccompanied youth, the definition is, of course, to start with McKinney-Vento, but this is also a good place because not all of them are runaways. It's also some youth that have left home for a multitude of reasons. Sometimes I'll get, well, they left because they had a fight with parents and they don't want to follow the rules and they're staying on someone's couch. That, believe it or not, is considered a McKinney-Vento unaccompanied youth. A student who's 18, who's still in high school, but is put out by their parents or parent is also considered an unaccompanied youth. So if you're not familiar with the definition, this is a good place to start to just get some more information on it. All right, next slide, please.
Okay, now we'll transition into instructional issues. I think the first topic is the e-learning challenges.
Chris, you're good. You could start and then I'll follow up.
Okay, no problem. Well, many districts are facing the same challenges, regardless of whether they are McKinney-Vento or they are, a student who has two parents and living, in a life of luxury, because the issues are really related to availability and accessibility. Down here again in the southern counties, especially in Salem County, which is the least populous county in the state, we have about 60,000 people here, and much of it is very rural, believe it or not. I know many people, when they think of New Jersey, that everything is connected, but we have large rural area spaces where there is no accessibility to some of these things, especially for your typical providers such as Comcast or Verizon or even Dish and so on and so forth. Not necessarily could you get that in particular areas of these counties. So some of the things that the schools have done, and I'm sure many of you already know this and have been doing this yourself, the idea of a mobile hotspot has come up many times. There are districts that are taking buses and using these mobile hotspots and parking them in an area and advertising that this area is available. Honestly, it's not the most conducive to education when you have families that are sitting in their cars trying to access, the internet to be able to complete assignments. So, some of that, has been in workarounds with, providing paper and pad type responses. And, one of the suggestions I have always given on that is that when you're delivering the food, you deliver the packets as well. And the next day, when you deliver the next round of food, you pick up that packet or whenever that information is due. That's one type of workaround. The other aspect is the idea of device availability. Some of the schools have been able to resolve that. For instance, here where I'm at, I'm an administrator in Woodstown. We've taken all of our Chromebooks out of our Chromebook carts, which are shared devices throughout the school, but we have put them open to anyone that believes that they need those devices in their home. And, I want you to consider this as well. When you have a family of 4 and you only have one laptop, it's awful hard for all of those students to use that one laptop. So we have suggested to make as much as you can available. Worry about the collection of those devices, worry about picking them up later, cleaning them, so on and so forth, as you have to, because right now we're in triage, and the best thing that you can do is offer those devices. And, many times students do have phones, but again, that's not the most one reliable way to access the internet, especially in these deep rural areas, especially where there's lack of towers and services. But the other issue is that when you are assigning these tablets and laptops, I hear a lot about, how are you going to regulate what they see and where they are? And again, we are in triage. So there's a lot of those, unless you subscribe to a service and you assign those services to those devices, you're going to have to let some of that go and, maybe put into place some, trust type of contracts with the children. the same as you might use for cheating and otherwise within your student handbooks. There are minutes that you can use or cards that you can provide to families for educational purposes. So you should be able to use some of your Title I funds towards that end. Check with your BAs on that because some of the COVID-19 legislation that has come out relaxing some of the rules for those things to provide those services, because the governor and the commissioner of education have called for virtual learning. So that is important, that perhaps that's a way to get around that. Some of the other struggles obviously are places to charge devices, and we just had mentioned about a stable learning environment for students is really tough if they don't have access inside their home, and also a quiet place for that learning to take place. So most districts are using flexible grading during this time. There's pros and cons to that, of course, but flexible grading at least offers the opportunity for students to take a look and get some of that work done and make those connections, because right now, and I'm sure we'll get to that mental health side, that seems to be much more at the forefront rather than whether or not they're completing their math assignments. Diane, did you want to add anything, or should we go on to the next slide?
We could go on to the next slide. Yeah, thank you for covering that.
Yeah, and some of the other pieces there, which I had mentioned, NJTV, which I'm pretty confident everyone has heard of right now. Grades 3 through 6 is available. Lots of great lessons there. Lots of teachers are stepping up, putting their lessons available in video format. So at least there's some instructional aspect that they can get to if they do not have access at home. I did mention those packets by bus, or they can be picked up at school if they have reliable transportation. So, use that bus company. Most school districts' bus company contracts run fiscal year to fiscal year. So get that bus company involved, especially if you, have a bus service right within your district. Many larger districts do. Utilize those bus services so you keep those folks busy and working, and they're getting paid, and at the same time offering services to our students and their families. I have found that's probably been the #1 way in which we can get things that we need to get to other students, especially across district lines. Your McKinney-Vento students, again, may live in another school district but are attending your school district. So use those bus runs that they would normally be on to get those services, packets, Chromebook devices, food, whatever it may be, out to them. The governor had made notice that, these are the numbers right now with students without access to the internet or a device. So that number is pretty significant. So hopefully many of the school districts have been stepping up to try to resolve some of those issues. I will say in our region, I had some money that I set aside towards that end to assist with devices. If that's something that you still are finding for your McKinney-Vento students, they are without a device, please just contact me directly and we'll see what we can do to try to decrease that gap. Again, other ways to which to address it is, offering free hotspots. Comcast does that. So if you just went onto comcast.net, there are millions of Comcast hotspots across the country, and obviously thousands of them are here in New Jersey. In our most rural areas, they're difficult to find, but they are available even in a lot of rural areas, especially if you have a small downtown area. I know in Woodstown here, we have about 30 hotspots that are local, even in our little town of 3,000. So they are accessible, and basically all they would have to do is find where it says Xfinity in the Wi-Fi, and they click on that, and it just does typically like you would in a Walmart or an Acme or another place that offers free Wi-Fi. They just ask you to abide by their rules. You click on that, and now you have free internet access. So students are able to access those hotspots at any location where they are found. And again, if you are a district homeless liaison, you should pass that information on to families who do not have internet, because maybe they have something close enough that's to them that they are able to access that. Again, we talked about Chromebooks. or other cost devices, you can maybe possibly look to be reimbursed for purchasing those. For our McKinney-Vento students, again, just contact me. And also through your Title I funding. Diane, did you want to add anything?
The only other thing aside from the Chromebooks, and again, this really has to be looked at for unaccompanied youth. If they need a phone, I guess you could call it a burner phone, they may be able to be given a cell phone if they don't have any other way to reach out to the liaisons, to the schools. And again, it's really going to be if they have no other way of contacting their liaison, if there's no parents, like this is someone that's coming from another state and there's just nobody here but them. And again, you can always rely on the calling cards, but nowadays, since, you know, payphones are a thing of the past, that is something you may want to consider depending on the student's situation, but it's always case by case.
Next slide is good.
Okay.
Diane, we have one quick question that's come up a number of times. Can you give the age range of unaccompanied youth? What is the ages for that, please?
It actually runs from pre-K through age 20.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, this one we've given you a link to a number of internet access points. You may have it, you may not, but they're there. And if yours isn't listed here, you can contact your local provider and they may have some offers of either free or reduced or something that you can do along those lines. Chris, Diana, if you want to add anything else?
No, this is pretty much, you know, self-explanatory. This is the list. And again, you know, Chris did a fabulous job of talking about Wi-Fi in school parking lots or putting, you know, Wi-Fi somehow going through the bus where the students can gather in the parking lot. You know, and again, the challenges are the students in mobile homes that may not have the best service or service at all. We had a family out of Passaic County with a few kids, and she says, look, I just can't afford it. You know, I can't even afford $10 a month. So that is something that Title I at this point may be able to cover. But there's also agencies like United Way that you can reach out to that may also be able to cover the fees if you cannot find hotspots. Because if you have someone with a newborn, they're not going to go out, you know, to a ShopRite or a Dunkin' Donuts, or it's challenging if you have four kids to pack them in the car and sit outside the school. So, you know, I'd say have those folks reach out to the liaison or reach out to myself or Chris or whoever their regional director is for their county if they're finding issues, because this way we can help them connect with the services that they need to access Wi-Fi. Again, case by case. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So additional challenges, again, Chris went over this with learning materials and the packets, having the bus runs, having the parents do curbside pickup. I'm even having the challenge of the inability to print. So, you know, you want to keep in mind when you are asking for work to be done, that printing may be an issue, that, you know, things that have to be scanned, again, may be an issue. You know, again, with downloading, that harkens back to the internet. So think about what the students are working on and how they are going to get it back to you. You know, if you need something that's going to be printed out, perhaps put it in the packet and send it to the student directly, because it's going to be challenging for them to find a printer or print something in color. You know, things that in the past, I mean, only just a month ago, we weren't even thinking about, like, oh, how are we going to print that out? Our office here, there, the library. Attendance, again, if you don't get a response from students, I've been telling liaisons, do not go and do a welfare check like in the past. See if the school resource officer can go out. If not, contact the police officer. You know, with McKinney-Vento, you're not supposed to have the police go out, but that was, again, to really do a residency check. That was all done, you know, starting with the liaison, starting with the school resource officer. But now, you know, in this particular time, it is allowable, and I received that direction from the state of New Jersey, because we need to find out, are these students still living there? Have they moved? Are they okay? Because I'm also getting districts saying family are being evicted or family are moving because the caregiver of so-and-so can't do it anymore. So now we're moving in with them, but they're not telling the schools, because again, it goes back to they're not sure if anybody is at the school to pick up the phone. So, you know, you want to really keep in contact with these families as much as possible, even going through the teachers saying, look, are you hearing from so-and-so? Yes, okay, I'm the liaison, I'm trying to reach them. Can you please send that parent an email, or however you're reaching out to that parent when they're picking up the work? You know, we still have the legal obligation to educate the students. There's a link there for the chronic absenteeism. Again, I spoke about the inability to send out SROs, and again, potential discrimination claims. We also have to be aware that the students that receive that have an IEP receive those services, because if they don't, that may spell trouble not only for them but also for the districts that aren't offering, you know, what's outlined in the IEP to the student. And Chris, do you want to chime in?
No, I think you did a great job, Diane. I think you hit on all the major components of that.
Okay.
And I would add in with the special ed, I am expecting, I wouldn't be surprised, I would say, come the fall, we're going to see a lot of claims for compensatory education, because things that were in the IEP weren't met because of what's going on. So you need to be able to show you made a good faith effort to do as much as you could, or to find alternatives, given what resources we have at this point, and alternative methods of delivering education or delivering assistance or aids or anything along those lines. Make sure you document everything that you've done so you can prove it later in writing.
Correct. Okay, if that's it with this slide, we'll move on.
All right, so moving to mental health issues. Next slide. There were a number of things that have come up, particularly since these kids may be home alone now, is that there's a fear, and this is not just kids, this is the adults, of what's going to happen. When do we get back to whatever normal is going to be? Will I get sick? What happens if I get sick? A lot of them are alone. They don't have the support groups of being in a school where they're with their friends and people their own age, and quite frankly, just not with mom or dad. You know, they get to be with people of their own age as opposed to being with their siblings and their adults all the time. Lack of resources, we've been talking about all of these types of problems, and the loss of routine also goes in with everything that we've noted above, that they're used to getting. It's kind of like us going to work. All of us that are working from home feel it's strange that, you know, you get up and you go from the bedroom to the dining room and that's your work day, and things are just out of sync and just different. So some people have a problem with not having their regular routine. They don't see the teachers that they normally see. They don't see the administrators that they see. They don't see their friends. And then Chris, you brought this up as well, considering the mental state of the parents and the guardians. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few factors that are related to that, and just listening to you, Sandra, you know, one of the things that there's a great scheduling guru named Dr. Kennedy, who always uses sports metaphors, and he likes to say that the students that we know that are going to do well, they have supportive parents, you know, turn in their work on time, stick to those schedules, have the resources. Those are students who are standing on third base and they're ready to score. And our students who are McKinney-Vento or at risk have just made it to first base. And the metaphor is really great, because some things that you don't consider, especially if you're a DHL, again, District Homeless Liaison, is you know, when I have you know, heard from our district, you know, I'll just use this as the example. You know, last year we had 7 homeless students. Right now I have 24. So you can see that that's a 300% increase in the number of students that we've had. And in that 24, I've had 7 qualify during this COVID closure. So, you know, when we're trying to put together things like food and resources and checking out for, you know, different conference calls and things like that, I always ask, you know, to try to speak to the parent, especially if you have the ability to do a Google Hangout or, you know, one of your, you know, webinars or some type of webcam to do a face-to-face with the parent to see where the parent is at. And one of the other things, just even little things when you're thinking about it, so you might get resources together and you're able to come up with you know, some packs of food and maybe a gift card, and you're pretty excited and you're able to drop that off to the family. Think about some other things that some of us who are standing on third base, myself included, and my children, you know, that I have lots of friends who are out there making, you know, making masks for people, and hey, I'm willing to give out 300 masks, so on and so forth. And most of us that are standing on third are realizing we're able to access those resources because we're friends with them, or maybe we're on Facebook together, so on and so forth. And many of these parents don't even know where they're going to get a face mask from so that they can visit the Acme from the gift card that you gave them. So just simple things like that. You know, when I do a drop off, I drop off 5 masks as well, 1 each maybe for each of the kids, and maybe a couple for the parent as well. And I try to give them a little reminder, a little card of some of the best practices for the COVID closures, because again, when you're thinking about that mental state of the parent and they're trying to come up with a way to feed their kids, they lost their job, now what are they going to do? They put in a claim for unemployment, they haven't heard from unemployment. I'm just giving various examples of the things that they may be going through. How their students are performing in school is really not at the high priority list for them. So, you know, many of the things that we need to do as district homeless liaisons is to try to address some of the things that may seem common sense to us in our normal days as we're taking in information and we're working from home, and try to address the things that they may not be able to do so. So those are the things that I really try to focus on and try to put myself in the shoes of the parents. And I realize sometimes that's really hard to do. But, you know, when they're working with their kids, I want you to think about it. They're not used to being at home with their kids all day as well. And, you know, they're used to working and getting up and having a routine themselves. So they face some of the same mental strains, and then that mental strain is passed on directly to these students. Diane, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you did a great job. Thank you so much.
I would say David did a webinar back on April 6th. I've given you the link to it here. That's free as well, where he's talking with various professional experts on helping with these. David, do you want to mention a little bit about that?
Yes, we did put together a team of experts on counseling and mental health issues, and put together that webinar. And there are so many resources out there to help with those issues. And one of the challenges is sort of figuring out how do we triage the supports that we're providing, because there are students who are showing us signs that they need immediate assistance. And then we have another group of students who we know have long-term issues where we have to provide ongoing support. And then there are lots of students who have new and emerging issues, in large part because of what we're going through. So when you walk through that April 6th webinar, you'll have some great resources on each one of those topics. And we also did a webinar in partnership with New Jersey PTA on addressing mental health issues and working with parents. That's also free and available on our website.
Okay, thanks.
I
Next slide. I'm so sorry.
Can I add one more thing? I just want to add one more thing on there, and I forgot to mention, and I know that the homeless liaisons in my counties know this, but I just want to give a reminder to them and anyone else that may need these services in those counties of Salem, Cumberland, Cape May, Mercer, and Burlington. I have 4 certified counselors on staff, 2 that have you know, social clinical licensed social workers, and I have 2 that are certified guidance counselors in schools that are on my staff to support students all during the school year, obviously, but right on my website, www.woodstown.org, and you click on homeless education, there is a link on the upper right-hand side that says referral services. And if you just click on that, that would send a referral to me, because I do know that many schools are overwhelmed right now trying to deal with the mass number of students you know, who are maybe in critical states related to the schoolwork they're doing and so on and so forth. But if you have McKinney-Vento students that could use an extra layer of counseling, and we can do it through Google Hangouts or some other format, we're certainly willing to step in there and help those students navigate some of the issues that they have. So I just want to make sure I put that out there.
That's great, thanks. The next couple of slides, we've given you a bunch of resources. This first slide is New Jersey Mental Health Resources. So if you click on the link, it takes you to the information of how to get in touch with them, how to get help from them. You can go to the next slide.
Yes, please.
There's a number of mental health resources as well. Diane, do you want to talk about any of these? You gave me all these links, so I don't know if there's anything you want to add to them.
Again, for the sake of time, these are really just slides that you're going to want to delve into and look at what materials are there. I know for the initial one, the Mental Health Anonymous, that it links you to Find a Meeting, which are live meetings that people can participate in, and they are statewide. So that is something that is a great resource to share with families. But again, before sharing it out, I would take a look at all the slides or whatever is of interest to you, and just make sure that they're viable for the communities that you want to share the information with.
Great, thanks. Next slide. All right, so funding issues. How do we pay for all this? Okay, going to the next slide. We'll start with the federal ones. Go ahead.
This is, okay, U.S. Department of Education. I looked into this. Essentially, what this is going to do is show us the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund. Again, it's pretty much, it's all explained in this slide. But when you open it up, you'll go to your state allocation table, and it'll just give you some wording on how to set aside the monies. The next couple of slides are a little bit more in depth. But again, this was more or less one of the first slides or first set of information that came out about the Education Department putting aside $13.2 billion. The next couple of slides will speak to how to apply for funding or how the governor applies for funding, and I'll get into that. So, okay, go to the next slide. All right, so with the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund and homeless students, this is under the CARES Act. This is a flexible grant for our governor to provide emergency assistance to respond to the coronavirus. Now, each state has until June 1st, 2020 to submit a signed certification agreement. Now, this is important for us. In Part C of the application, the second question addresses the needs of students experiencing homelessness. And this is part of the uses of Governor's Emergency Education Fund. So this is pretty much for the liaisons. Specifically, it says, please describe the strategies used to serve disadvantaged populations. What that is the Governor's Emergency Education Fund can be provided, can be used rather to provide support for authorized activities. And it references the McKinney-Vento Act's Education of Homeless Children and Youth program. So when you go into the slide, again, you can read more on it, but there is a section, let me take a look, that actually states Schoolhouse Connection. That's again, I spoke about them earlier. That is the group that put all this information out. They've created a state education leader checklist that can be shared with your state educational agency leaders. The reason that it's important is that this is the way the state and the governor can recognize from the liaisons what the monies could be used for or what our struggles are in obtaining services, paying for services. And Schoolhouse Connection has created a link or rather a checklist that can be shared. So in this particular slide, you'll see where it says schoolhouseconnection.org, a closer look. When I went into that section, you have to look around, but that's where it was listed. And I think that is something that's important, that we really have our voices heard, so that we can help offer information so that they see, boots on the ground, what we're doing and how we're utilizing the money to help these disadvantaged students. So that's this link here. That's this slide. All right, next slide. Okay. And this is, let's see, the Governor's Education Relief Fund. Again, funds specifically can be used to provide support for activities under the McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless and Children and Youth program. So again, it's similar. It's more of the same, rather, that it's money that's going to be set aside, and if you feel that you want to write to your regional coordinator and send information to the state person, or we can, you can reach out to Phoebe Thomas, who's our state coordinator for McKinney-Vento directly. I think that would be important, so they recognize, what we're all doing, what the stories are, how the families are requesting services, what those services are. Okay. So we're going to move on to the next one. And for this one, again, this has to do with the CARES Act. If you look at it, it'll show a summary of provisions from K to 12. Again, it speaks to children and youth experiencing homelessness, and that they're retaining all educational rights under the current federal law. So that means the McKinney-Vento Act is still in effect, and all the regulations listed under the McKinney-Vento Act have not changed. It authorizes our Secretary of Education to waive various sections of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act related to assessment, state plans, and the allocation of funding, but it does not authorize the Secretary to waive the education subtitle of McKinney-Vento Act. But again, you may want to take a look and see where that allocation of funding, how it is changed. I know something just went out today. There's also an allowable use of funds. The governor has to decide on it, but it covers allowable use of funds, specifically include activities under McKinney-Vento, and purchasing educational technology, as Chris mentioned, hardware, software, connectivity, mental health services and supports, and also ensuring access to summer learning, supplemental after-school programs. So again, the monies that we've had in the past, they're going to be used in different ways. There's going to be supplemental, hopefully. And again, it's a moving target. This is something that just came out. I encourage everybody to really look at it and just absorb it, because at some point, you're going to sit down with all your numbers and say, okay, this is how many students we had for the year. I think another NJ Smart count comes out in June, and you're going to want to make sure that you are thinking about, even for September or for the summer, how are we going to service these students that have extended school year? And I believe that reviewing these economic stimulus programs and relief funds may give you some answers, give you some clarity. I know it's very wordy, but if I could understand it, anybody can. All right, next slide, please. All right, Chris, you want to talk about the 3-year?
And I will say, just before we go, we put this in here because I think there was some confusion about this memo coming out, that it was something COVID related as opposed to the 3-year grant. So Chris, do you want to address that?
Sure. So what this grant funding is the funding that Diane and I and 3 others manage across the state of New Jersey. Every year we apply for these funds that come from a federal grant that's then managed through the New Jersey Department of Education. And these funds basically are based upon the number of homeless students that you have in a particular region. There are 5 regions now within the state of New Jersey, each covering a certain section of counties across the state. As I had mentioned earlier, for me, I usually manage just Salem, Cumberland, and Cape May. However, this year, due to some issues with a grant application, I was asked to manage Mercer and Burlington just for this year. So that being said, this is the grant funding. It's pretty all-encompassing, and you would have to develop a project which would service all 3 in my area, all 3 of that particular region for all those counties that I service. So this is a grant that is, generally speaking, applied to year after year by the same regional program administrators. It's not like a district can just apply for a certain portion of those funds. However, just to be fair in that a district could contact the typical regional providers, such as myself or Diane, and ask for perhaps a sub-grant under that grant funding that maybe they want to fund a particular project that directly supports McKinney-Vento students. So that's kind of the difference between what you might find on a typical grant that says, hey, it's open to all districts, you can apply for a portion of it or the full amount, and only the district would have to worry about management of it. This grant includes, training and PD opportunities for all of the district homeless liaisons in those counties or that region, and servicing and assisting in homeless issues, trying to resolve those eligibility issues mostly in all of those particular counties. So the homeless liaisons who are on here today know who each of us are because they deal with us directly. If you are a administrator, you might not be familiar with that grant funding, and you might want to talk to your liaison about that. I don't discourage any of you from applying because obviously any district or educational agency could apply for this funding and become the manager if you put together, a good application in order to do that. However, historically, most districts do not apply for it because they know that another district is already managing that every year for them. But again, it's open to anyone who is interested in applying for it. And as you can see, the deadline dates for it, so on and so forth. Diane,
Okay, next slide. This one, it's actually dated April 30th. That's why it's listed as memo number 2, but it was published this morning. Diane, do you want to talk about this one?
This one, as you mentioned, just came through this morning, so I looked at it briefly. It came from the Department of Education, from actually our state coordinator. And again, I was on a call with Title I, and it seems like, again, they're speaking on the bottom, select ESEA fiscal requirements waiver. They were just giving us an update to show what has changed, again, with the Title I and what the waiver looked like. So again, this would be more for the Title I folks who are listening in.
Okay, great. And I think we have a wrap-up slide. Is that the next slide? There we go. We were talking about the need to complete the assessments, that the homeless liaisons need to complete their assessments. So if you are the liaison, you obviously know what this is. If you are an administrator, you want to follow up on this and make sure this is done so that the regional directors know what your district needs. Chris, do you want to talk about this a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I'm just using this needs assessment here as a link. My homeless liaisons know that I basically take the information off of this paper and pencil type of assessment that's listed here that you could print out, and I have them fill it out on a Google form. However, for district administrators, especially at the CSA level, BA level, this is a really good assessment from Schoolhouse Connection to help you understand the Title I needs assessment for your set aside dollars. So every district should be in their budget in the state of New Jersey. It is a requirement now that you should be setting aside a certain amount of money in your Title I funding to go to support your McKinney-Vento students who are eligible each year. The language that's used by the state for this is pretty vague. However, they ask you to consider what you spent the previous year on your McKinney-Vento students, and then obviously take a look at that, speak to your homeless liaison, and understand what those needs may be. Some of you may have very few needs because your numbers are lower, and some of you may have much larger needs, and you already, kind of address that with a committee of sorts. But if you haven't done this before, I get this question a lot. That's why I was asking this to be included. How much should I set aside for our Title I funds for McKinney-Vento? This is a good place to start. And obviously, you could always reach out to Diane or myself for some more guidance.
I just want to mention what I have told liaisons in the past is to start with a base of $250 per student. That's what the NJDOE had recommended. Even for the districts that never have homeless students, they report 0. You still want to set aside something, even if it's used for something else later in the year, because if a student does come through, you're going to have to be ready. And if you're not a Title I district, you're going to take it from general funds. But either way, whether you're Title I or not, you're going to have to set aside some type of funding just to make sure that you are prepared. And every district has to have a liaison that is federally mandated through the McKinney-Vento Act. So please make sure that A, you have a homeless liaison, and B, you know who that person is.
Great. Okay, and so we touched on some summer program issues a little bit. As we said, we're waiting for guidance to come, so keep an eye out for that. And I know as soon as we get it at PSA, FEA, we will be putting stuff out about that. The shelter issues, you have your resources of calling 211 or going to NJ211. The Dropbox, the link is there. If you do the next slide. We're kind of out of time, so we did get some questions as we were going, and we have received the questions, so we can perhaps do a follow-up later. Next slide. Some additional information resources. Diane wanted this included. This link gives you, I give you the topics that are all covered under there if you're looking for some more things to do. And it has things including dealing with people with that need resources in the government and state information sites. Next slide. This is Christopher's contact information. Chris, if you want to have any parting thoughts, and then we'll do Diane's.
I just want to again, reiterate, we are readily available and accessible. That's why I include my cell phone number there, especially during this COVID time. I text, I, do a variety of ways of contact. So please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any question about McKinney-Vento or any way in which I can help you. Even if you're outside of my county or region, I can put you in touch with the right people. And thank you for attending.
Great, thanks. Next slide, Diane.
I just want to thank everybody for listening in today. Stephanie Rim is our new support specialist. So for folks in my region, you may already have received information from her. And again, we're both available, pretty much every day, Monday through Friday. So if you have any questions, reach out to us, email, call. And as Chris mentioned, even if you're outside of our regional area, call us anyway, because we'll put you in contact with your regional director for your programs.
Great, thank you. Next slide. Here is the contact information for both David and I. You see our email addresses down there, and also the link to the website for finding all the webinars and for anything that Legal One does as well. Next. And we have a number of webinars coming up, which is this slide and the next slide. I want to thank everyone for coming today. Rebecca Gold, I want to thank you for manning the questions that were coming in. Any thoughts on your end before we go?
Thank you all. No, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful resource. Everybody is writing in how grateful they are.
Great, and thank you so much to Chris and Diane for all of your knowledge and information and all the time that you spend in helping prepare for this webinar. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. To everyone out there, to all the moms out there, happy Mother's Day this coming weekend. And to everyone else, I'd say keep in touch. And we write these webinars based on what you tell us you need information about. So if you have an idea or a topic that we have not covered yet, please let us know. And then we can put something together and try to find the expert people to talk about it, like we had today with Diane and Chris. So with that, I will say on behalf of David and myself and everyone that's here today, thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you the next time. Thanks.